think carefully about moving from block to text-based languages, whether that be in upper primary school or transitioning into secondary school. And rather than using them separately, as some people prescribe to, I'd use them together as a scaffold. So if I'm going to use Scratch to solve a problem, I'd use that to remove the logical errors, and then I might move to Python and think about the syntactical errors. One thing I would be aware of though is that you're going to need to think carefully about how you teach using a block-based language like Scratch, because every text-based language is slightly different. So you need to think carefully about how you're going to use Scratch. So for example, I'll give you two if that's okay. The first example would be there is no wait, say something for 2 seconds, okay, in a text-based language. You have something called the wait instruction, you import it. So when we're using Scratch, we need to say hello world, wait 2 seconds, repeat, okay? And that can be something that can challenge children when they first get going with text-based languages. They think it's hard or boring or whatever. The other one is maybe, for example, using variables. So if you're going to use a variable in Scratch and you're going to say change variable by 1, okay? In Python, I would be thinking about saying that variable called number plus equals 1, so it changes it by 1. On the other hand, if in Scratch I was using a variable by saying number equals number plus 1, I would then use that same set of instructions for using it in Python. I wouldn't mix and match those because I've seen some very blank faces over the last couple of years. So you've got pedagogies that work for you, following step-by-step instructions to get children to make a program. Yes, it's rote learning. Yes, we want to move children on from that. But actually, let's be honest, it's a bit of a comfort blanket for all of us. So rather than them throwing it away and starting again, I would think, how could we improve that pedagogy to make it better and gradually transition the children in the way that they approach learning and computing lessons to gradually change both for the teacher and for the child. So for example, I would encourage you to put deliberate mistakes or bugs into the instruction worksheet so that children then have to go through and debug the worksheet whilst they're trying to make whatever it is that you're doing. Or I would encourage them to be reading the code that's on the worksheet and then asking them to fill in the gaps, which is the text explanation. So they have to read the code and write out what the code is doing as though they were creating the worksheet for another child, okay? Or perhaps even just leave gaps in the worksheet that the child has to fill in. And these are all really good strategies, right, for improving the way that we teach computing. And it's a nice little step forwards in the right direction that I would be totally behind. If you talk to lots of friends and even myself for a number of years, I probably only taught 3, 4, 5 programming skills. I really struggled to know what the others were. And then I stumbled across some academic research by Fuller et al. 2011, which identified, I think it was 11 to 13 different programming skills, and they were aligned to Bloom's taxonomy. But it wasn't Bloom's taxonomy in a kind of linear hierarchical format, but more in a grid format. So debugging is both analysis, but also the application. And what I really like about it is it can give me confidence as a teacher that I'm teaching the children a tool set that they can then encourage them to become more resilient and independent designers and writers of code. And I think it provides that really good foundation to then start to look at how we do project-based learning with children. You know, how do we break down problems? How do we abstract out the information? How do we generalize? And actually, by having the children work their way through lots of different bits of code and generalizing, etc., etc., and they've now got more of a toolkit that can help them to get started. So start to gradually engage with key bits of academic research, but don't get bogged down in the really long words and all the data and stuff like that. Computing, I think, and programming is a really exciting and creative subject, but I'm on record a number of times in saying the way I was taught programming was really bad and I didn't like it very much. And one of the things I've been experimenting with is looking at, can we take those games that we apply in all different subjects like dominoes or mix and match or spot the difference, all these household games, right? And can we apply these to programming, and can we specifically apply them to particular skills? So an example of that would be, if I'm trying to get children to move from a block to a text-based language, I show them the blocks of code in Scratch. I then put the Python code or whatever the language is on the other side of the page, and I get children to do mix and match, and they've got to join them together. And this is great, right? Because it helps them to read code. But then taking that one step further, I can even, if it was children who were learning, say, Scratch for the first time, I could show them pictures and then match the blocks to the pictures. So I'd encourage you to look at how we teach maths and how we teach English in other subjects, and modern foreign languages as well, I think is really key, at both primary and secondary, so that we can start to identify what is the good pedagogy that we can pull into our subject. But most importantly, we've got to start making learning to code exciting and fun, because let's be honest, learning to read code is a bit boring, and we don't want to turn children off at the first hurdle. So really, I'm encouraging you to experiment, explore, take risks with your pedagogy. Mistakes are good. You know, I look back at how I taught computing a few years ago, and I look at how I teach it now, and my pedagogy has moved on, but I've made lots of mistakes and errors along the way. Share what you're doing with others. Tell them what works, but also tell them what doesn't work, so that people don't waste their own time, or they repeat something and they make the same mistake as you. It's better if they can try and make their own mistakes. And also, by sharing with others what doesn't work, you know, you'll get their support, and they will be able to share with you what they're doing, and hopefully help you to do what we really want to do, and that's maximize outcomes and progression and motivations in our children to have an understanding of coding. But not because we want every child to code, but because children live in a digital world, and increasingly it's become more and more important that, you know, that they understand computation.